So I think it's become apparent that our civilization is actually bad for our children. It's actually making them more depressed. It's making them suicidal. It's turning them into the kind of people I don't think we would have wanted to be if we were growing up in their place at this time. And I think that's actually something that's really worth discussing and we should really be thinking about. So before we begin, let's if you're gonna criticize, you've got to provide a constructive alternative, and that
Call it
constructive
selling out your
alternative.
principles. I call it fucking winning.
What's
I
going
pressed
on?
the wrong thing.
That was the wrong button. What's going on? I've got.
Yeah,
I'll do it. Don't
Thank
worry.
you. So yeah, go and watch our symposium on Nicomachean ethics, because that is, of course, a very, very good alternative to whatever ethical system that the left is recommending at the moment. So anyway, does this work now? Let me see if this works.
There we go.
Right. So I found this article the other day, and it started me going down a bit of a rabbit hole because just what's in it is actually kind of crazy. And I say this as a father of children of about the age that this article is dealing with. So they say three influential groups of pediatricians and emergency medical providers are pleading for more support and resources as the number of children and teenagers with mental health concerns overwhelm emergency departments nationwide. That's mad, isn't it?
That's not good. And this is in America.
Yeah, but we'll get to it.
Oh, I'm
being
sure
in
it's
Britain
not.
as well.
I'm sure it's not much better in England either.
Yeah, right. So America is having a nationwide mental health crisis for children. We are too, but I'll get to that in a minute, right? So the lead author of a joint policy statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Emergency Physicians, and the Emergency Nurses Association released a statement that it's calling for local communities to have increased access to mental health services before emergency care is needed. It's like, okay, that's interesting, but that kind of seems to be putting the cart before the horse, right? It's like, look, we need extra care services. Okay, but why do you need extra care services? Let's go a bit upriver and see where the source of the poison is. They say every year in America, approximately 500,000 children with mental or behavioral health conditions are evaluated in emergency departments. And that number is, of course, increasing and not decreasing. Mental. It's a
That's
huge
not very good.
number, right? One doctor who is deeply involved with this said that the emergency care in her ER for mental health has grown from approximately 30 a month to 30 a day. So she says the volume is astronomical. I don't know that people fully understand how many people are struggling. Jenkins said that children as young as 6 are coming in, often talking about suicide.
6 years old. Well, there's something interesting here, which is that a 6-year-old does not naturally come up with the idea of suicide by themselves.
No, you would think not. Right?
Who is giving them these ideas?
Yeah.
Is it the parents? Is it the environment around them? Are they being exposed to media, which is obviously far too mature for their brains, the maturity that they have? What's going on?
I mean, I'm surprised that a 6-year-old even knows the word suicide.
Yeah, 6-year-olds shouldn't be introduced to that kind of language.
But it's not even that. I mean, okay, fine. Having knowledge of the concept, fine. Why do they feel that this is the case? And they say, the crisis is only getting worse, it's not getting better. One study in February for the CDC found an unprecedented level of hopelessness and suicidal thoughts among the nation's youth. The bulk of these children are coming in with depression, anxiety, and trauma. This is mad, right? This is a nationwide failing to provide a proper and wholesome environmental structure in the country itself. The whole thing, the way that it's configured, seems to be for adults and not for children.
Well, that's part of it. I would say there are two things I want to... Well, one thing I want to know and one comment I'm going to make about this. The comment is just that we are in a world that is promoting paradoxical morals right now, where children and young, immature people are being placed in a position where they're expected to be able to have a full, comprehensive understanding of the world around them and themselves. We're putting increasingly more serious and life-changing decisions into the hands and autonomy of children who, as we know, do not know anything well enough to be able to make those decisions, whilst at the same time we're encouraging adults, young adults in particular, to engage in a very childish, arrested development attitude of behavior where they become the eternal teenage boy.
Yeah, and it's extended adolescence.
Yeah, the extended adolescence where they're just becoming a Marvel soy boy, collecting their Funko Pops on the walls all day, every day, cooming over all sorts of childish nonsense.
Yeah.
So we've got the paradox there of the way that that's been inverted. We're expecting children to be adults, adults to be children. The second thing, I want to know, how old are the parents of these children? Because we're talking about young children. So if we're talking about 6 years old, chances are these parents are all very young. And we know that children copy their parents. The children copy the behavior of the adults around them. Is it that we have a new generation of millennial or maybe even very, very old Gen Z parents who already come in with a nihilistic material worldview, that already come in with neuroticism and anxiety, and that's all they talk about? And their children are seeing that and copying them. Because their parents appear hopeless, the children just naturally assume, I guess everything's hopeless. Not to say there's not problems in the real world, but when we're talking about kids this young, it's not like children can really comprehend the managerial state and socioeconomic issues and all sorts.
Sure.
But
where
are they getting it from?
Well, they don't tell us how old the parents are.
That's a shame.
There's no doubt that the children are exposed to, at the very least, some apocalyptic doom mongering about the climate.
Oh yeah,
and this, I think, is not helpful to anyone.
It is probably
at all.
Something to do with the teachers as well.
No doubt. But anyway, the group has a series of joint policies that are just, we need extra resources to deal with mental health. And it's like, okay, actually no, we need to go upriver and find out why the problem is happening and actually change something foundational about this, because they're looking at this totally the wrong way around. And of course, we have exactly the same problem in England. In England, we have, 466,250 open referral to children and young people's mental health services that are active in May this year. So massive mental health crisis in England as well.
Christ.
So this is not in any way confined just to America, unfortunately.
And what's the solution they're giving to these kids as well? Especially if it'll probably include, mostly I imagine it'll be young girls, but increasingly it'll be young boys as well, who are feeling hopeless in the world around them.
Yeah.
What are the solutions that these young boys will be given? They'll be given feminine solutions. Oh, go to therapy.
We'll get
Talk
to
about.
We'll get to all of this. Right?
That won't help.
So some of the common problems these children suffer from are anxiety disorders, where they have persistent fears or worries that they find it hard to participate in normal social activities that they should be engaging in. ADHD, which again, we're going to come back to all of these in a minute, where of course children experience inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, eating disorders, depression and bipolar disorder, and PTSD.
PTSD?
Right? So which it's not if the child has been traumatized, they can have PTSD.
Well, no, of course, but it's shocking and terrible that these children should be traumatized in the first place.
Well, one thing that is traumatizing them are the lockdowns.
There you go.
So let's have a look at some of the reasons why we may have generation of children that are just literally traumatized by the environment, the civilization that's supposed to take care of them, right? So we know that the lockdowns were massively damaging to children. This is definitely one reason. I mean, this is just crazy, right? Obviously, we know that the educational development of these children has been massively impacted, but it's also the social development of these children. And so they are feeling essentially sort of stressed with a remarkable amount of pressure put on them because they can't live a normal life. They can't blow off steam as kids need to do or couldn't during the lockdowns. And we're going to be reaping the fruits of this.
And people are already getting more and more antisocial anyway, because they can just disappear into video games and social media, and this is going to make it even worse.
Yeah, and there's loads of this study has been done. I mean, this one from just a Mental Health Foundation charity did a study and found direct impacts on children and young people's mental health and well-being were really bad, actually. Essentially, studies increased levels of distress, worry, and anxiety, and PTSD symptoms in quarantine, and increased likelihood of PTSD symptoms in quarantine children. Increased feelings of loneliness and worries about school in the future. Brilliant. So essentially, if the government has locked us all down for a disease as undramatic as COVID, should we say, who knows what's going to happen in the future, etc., etc. But another thing is divorce. Divorce is really, really bad for children's mental health. And of course, as we see, I think it's like 50% of children now 50% of marriages end in divorce, and something around half of children are in single-parent households in Britain now. And of course, this is way worse in different communities.
I saw some figures this morning. I don't know where they were exactly
Mm-hmm.
from that was pertaining to this. So I think 50 out of every 100 marriages, so 50%, is actually not on the high side of these rates in some places. I think
really?
the highest one that I saw was something absolutely ridiculous. Like I think it was Portugal, was per 100 marriages, 91 of them ended in
God.
divorce. And I was thinking about it yesterday. I was actually discussing this with my fiance, how when I was growing up and going through school, most of the people that I knew who were my contemporaries in school, most of them also came from parents who had divorced.
Right, that's
And
interesting, because
it
when
was
I was
very shocking.
it was the opposite. I mean,
I was probably, I would say, on the one of the exceptions, having parents who stuck together.
yeah, when I was in school, I mean, almost everyone's parents were married. I mean, it just wasn't something that came up really. I mean, I can't think of any of my friends, like my good friends, whose parents were divorced.
Well, marriage has just become something that you can take on because it makes you feel good at the moment. And then the second it becomes inconvenient to you, it doesn't matter if you've got kids or not. I guess we can just leave, because it's not that most of these relationships are breaking down because of physical abuse or anything that would actually be excusable,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned. No,
Well,
it's just
a good reason for the
yeah,
marriage to
a good reason.
end.
It's just, oh, I just don't feel it anymore.
Yeah,
I'm just not feeling that same spark. Well, you're never going to feel that same spark for 60 plus years.
Yeah, well, and I've got to say, I do think this is the thing that a lot of young women are failing to understand, is that the excitement of the initial romance needs to sort of sublimate into affection and a long-standing, deep-seated love for the other person. But anyway, divorce obviously hurts children, right? So research on this is voluminous, and it's documented that parental divorce separation is associated with an increased risk of child adjustment problems, including academic difficulties, disruptive behaviors, and depressed moods. Offspring of divorced parents are more likely to engage in risky sexual behavior, live in poverty, and experience their own family instability, and this is a massively increased risk factor. So, I mean, again, there's nothing controversial about me saying this. This is incredibly well documented. And as we've talked about before, Facebook and Instagram, particularly Instagram for teenage girls, this is not good for them. 32% of teenage girls said Instagram made them feel worse about their bodies when they already felt bad about their bodies. And Facebook is or Meta, we should say, is well aware of this. In fact, from their own internal research, once they had like a presentation, and one slide said, "We make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls. Teens blame Instagram for increases in the rates of anxiety and depression. And this reaction was unprompted and consistent across all groups."
So what have they done? Did they pop the champagne cork when they said, "Oh, we're giving young girls eating disorders"? Pop there, mission accomplished, boys.
Well, they're not stopping using Instagram, are they?
Well, yeah.
So,
as far as I can tell, Instagram isn't doing anything to prevent that.
yeah. And the next thing is the feminization of education for young boys. This is, again, something that is just, there's so much research on this out there if you want to go and watch it. But I'm just going to read a couple of quotes from this particular article. The feminization of education is thought to give girls more of an advantage over boys, and this is one reason is the workforce's general structure, organization, and construction are female biased. Since there are significantly more women teachers, especially in the formative years of children's education, there are more female role models that young girls can look to. Girls may be more likely to listen to and seek advice from female teachers than boys. Teachers' interactions with their students may also give girls more of an advantage. Women teachers generally hold higher expectation for girls' abilities and lower expectation of boys' abilities. Therefore, these teachers may be less concerned if the boys fall behind, while the girls may be encouraged to raise their standards. So half of the children in the school system are essentially being taught by people who have an unconscious bias against them. It's not the fault. It's not the female teachers are being malevolent. You know, I'm sure they're doing their best. It's that these are things that they just can't really help because they just don't understand the other half of the class.
I mean, it's interesting because I learned a bit about this when I was in college. We were doing an English language class, and for some reason, I don't remember what the subject was, but we were talking about differences in educational attainment between men and women and why boys seem to rebel more than girls do. And this was one of the theories proposed in that class. And at the time, I was like, I don't know how serious that sounds or if that sounds like it's a legit thing that's going on. But no, with experience, and looking into the matter since then, no, it's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Especially going into university where overwhelmingly it is for girls.
Yeah.
Seemingly. They're the ones going in, they're the ones
I
attaining
mean,
it. They're the ones getting the qualifications and ending up in other media careers and such things, influencing the culture for other girls.
By the time it gets to university, I think the damage has been done, basically. So a unisex university, I don't think is a big deal. But I do think in the early stages of their education, actually, it should have sex segregation, and boys should be taught by men, girls should be taught by women, because of the, as I say, like the inability to essentially understand or empathize with or have knowledge of the problem, and the fact that girls are more willing to go to women and boys are more willing to go to men. Why not?
I think
you've been through their stage in life.
I say this only half ironically, half sarcastically. I believe boys should primarily get taught the basics in English, math, science, etc., and then mainly taught to plaster and do other manual labor, because their parents aren't doing it.
I mean, I mean, if anyone shows any particular academic skill, then give them a different curriculum, right? Like, if you've got some kid with 130 IQ or something, don't make him do plastering.
He might be a really good plasterer.
Sure, but he probably doesn't want to do it. He probably wants to do something else. But for the average person, yeah, that's a much better solution. But anyway, right. So the consequence of feminized education, as they say in here, the boys are of course more likely to drop out of school. They fail to complete the degrees, and they behave more violently. The number of boys enrolling in colleges and universities has decreased. Boys are unenthusiastic about the work itself, don't do their homework, don't study for lessons, and receive poor grades. Boys disengage from school because they view it as feminine. They view education as a feminine thing. It never used to be. Education, of course, used to be a very masculine thing. Schools may be too feminized and imposing feminine qualities that the male students cannot relate to. Again, if it was an all-boys school with male teachers, that would not be the case. And it would be competitive. It would be well-structured. It would be something that they could actually find, they could relate to and find sort of a purpose and a path in, right, to go forward. But if you've got a different environment that's essentially not designed for you, then no wonder you're looking at this going, well, I shouldn't even be here, right? And of course, they say a lack of male teachers acting as role models is also believed to create problems for boys regarding motivation, discipline, and social interaction. So there are severe and concrete negative consequences for boys. And then we get to the final thing, which is a bit more vague, but and I'm representing it in this gender neutral parenting. But it's not really gender neutral parenting that I want to talk about with this, right? This is just one aspect, one outgrowth of the problem that I think our civilization faces, which is this obsessive devotion to the concept of personal, individual freedom, as in freedom from everything, right? The desire, the drive to become the atomized, unisex, year zero, self-made individual. The thing that doesn't exist, basically, right? There is no atomized, unisex, self-made individual. You are, in fact, a person who has a gender, has a sex, who has a history, who has a network of connections. You're born in a particular time and place to a particular culture. You come with a lot of cultural baggage. And our civilization is trying to shear off this cultural baggage so you can be some sort of perfect self-created individual. I think that's actually really bad for children themselves, because children, and I say this with 4, so
more than enough experience.
I have some experience in this regard, right? Children actually aren't really that concerned about freedom, because they aren't free, obviously. They've never been free. A baby is not free. A toddler is not free. In fact, you spend a lot of your time making your toddler as unfree as you possibly can, because they will ruin everything around them, especially if they're a boy. What they want is predictability, right? That's the thing that makes a child happy and secure and healthy mentally, is predictability. To know that if they take action X, then they get result Y, and in every realm. And so say, look, you've got unlimited freedom. You come into, I can't remember what it's called, the choice paradox or something. If you present people with, more than 7 choices or something like that, they don't choose anything.
I think that's option paralysis.
That's it, option paralysis, right? And this is the same. I think that this gender neutral parenting is kind of an outgrowth of this. We want them to choose their own gender. Why? That's a choice they don't get to make. They're born with a sex, and a sex comes attached to a gender, And so what you want is for that person to successfully and competently move into the gender role that nature has ascribed to them. You don't get to choose these things. That's nonsense. And what you're doing there is setting them up for failure, because of course they're going to go out into the world as an adult and realize, oh no, everyone else is gendered. Now I can't form a human relationship because everyone has expectations embedded in them about the opposite gender. And so if I'm not acting like a man, or if you're female and you're not acting like a woman, why would the person of the opposite sex find you attractive? They're not going to look at you and be like, okay, well, she looks like she's going to be a good wife and mother. She looks like she's going to be, if this person doesn't display any of the attributes that are expected, and as a male, he doesn't look like a good man. He's not going to be a good provider. He's not going to protect me. He's not going to make me feel safe. Okay, well, if you can't do that, you're not going to get a wife. It's just the way that these things work. And so I think that underpinning all of this, we've got essentially, this is the consequence of liberalism being applied in a full spectrum to our society, right? The idea that we are individual, unisex, atomistic organisms is just not true. And as we move into this paradigm, it's doing damage to our children. Whereas in a sort of more traditional sense, actually, children had expected life paths and there'll be someone who objects that, look, well, this is very oppressive, cloying, sort of, weighing you down with these things. It's like, in a way, yes, right? But also, it is not nearly as bad as you're saying. There are choices that children have to make. They're not just the foundational choices about their own existence they have to make. Because a 6-year-old should be choosing the kind of clothes that they would like to wear. Or, do I want to wear a t-shirt or a shirt or something, right? Or the kind of toys that they want for Christmas, right? They shouldn't be choosing between life and non-life. And that's too much of a foundational choice.
Well,
being given there.
When you talk about the fact that kids need boundaries, obviously they need boundaries. I don't even necessarily know that if I would say it's liberalism specifically.
I think this is liberalism.
Partially. But I think that what's happened is we have a generation of people who grew up consuming media and consuming narratives that told them that to be cool and to be themselves and to be free was to rebel against some form of order that came before them.
Yeah,
and so extending into the eternal adolescent that we mentioned earlier, these people orientate their entire lives around this idea that to be themselves is to rebel against what their parents would have wanted for them. And when you extend that out into a society-wide culture, then you just get pure chaos.
Yeah, but it's not just that, because I mean, the problem is now there isn't that kind of traditional order that was set for, because the boundaries are a way of providing with structure. It includes things and excludes things, and then provides them with a direction with which to travel. But these days, it's just, well, go to university. That's all they get told. Okay, and do what?
That's the thing, is that the people who raised the generations that we're talking about now were the first ones that really got told, rebel against your parents. It's really cool if you do that. You don't need structure. You don't need this sort of stuff. And then they raised children without as much structure, and it's snowballed from there. And now all that they have is the structure that's presented to them by the government.
Yeah, and this began with the boomers in the 60s. You didn't get, prior to that, you didn't get the sort of generational revolts. But now we're at the point where there's just nothing left to revolt against. So at least if I'm engaged in like a revolt against traditional order, at least you've got the traditional order. You were raised by it. So you've got all the inculcated assumptions that it came with in your mind. So the boomers in some ways are really traditional, but in other ways are totally radical.
Well, they grew up in an era where they could still enjoy the fruits of the society that came before them.
And now we're like 3 or 4 generations down that line.
And now we've got bloody teenagers LARPing as though the 90s and early 2000s were the 1950s.
Exactly.
Or even Victorian England.
Exactly. And it's so totally off the reservation that the notion of structure and order is going to make a return. But anyway, I'll leave that there, because basically our civilization is essentially designed to maximize the freedom of adults, and we're imposing that level of freedom on children where it's just inappropriate. They do not need that level of freedom. What they need is reliability and security. That's what children need.
If you enjoyed that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, why not visit our website, where you can get the podcast live, in full, uncensored, and for free from 1 o'clock UK time every weekday. And while you're there, for as little as £5 a month, you can get access to all of our premium content, For example, Dan's series Brokenomics, where he and Carl discuss the observable managed decline in our civilization. And if you'd like to see what the rest of us are putting out, you can follow Dan at @KingBingo_ on Twitter and @LotusEaters_com on Twitter. Until next time, goodbye.